This guy solved a 10 by 10 Rubik's Cube blindfolded. But how is this possible? Well, first, let's rewind back to when the original cube was made. When even the inventor thought solving it normally was impossible, let alone blindfolded. Because each turn requires tracking 8 pieces on the same layers, meaning after just 5 moves, the cube already looks completely different. And in 1982, at the first World Championship, the winning solution was 57 moves long. Way too many moves to track. But the breakthrough didn't come from doing fewer moves, but more moves. Because early solvers realized that certain sequences, or algorithms, change only around a few pieces at a time. Like this one that just twists these 2 corners, or this one that swaps these 3 corners. And even though to solve these 4 pieces, you need to do 25 moves, as long as you remember the algorithms and where each piece is, then you don't need to memorize every color moving with every turn, but just how to twist and swap each of the 20 pieces on the cube. And while I drastically oversimplified the example, that's the essence of the first main method made by Richard Carr around 2002, called 3OP. Which means that even if your full solution is 173 moves long, you just need to remember something like this, which is still a lot but much more doable. And this is the method used in the earliest world records you'll see. But how do you solve the 4x4 and 5x5 blindfolded, which have almost 3 to 5 times the amount of pieces as a standard cube? Well, while it's technically possible to use the method I mentioned before, now is a good idea to explore more efficient solutions. And in 2004, Stefan Pochmann came up with a revolutionary yet simple idea: use even more moves. Which sounds more complicated, but if you look at the moves, you'll see the same algorithms used over and over again. And if you break down what's happening, we're solving just one piece at a time, which sounds slower, but we're twisting and swapping at the same time. So in other words, solving directly, which makes the cube both easier to memorize and solve. And later on, he would develop a new method that replaces the 14 to 15 move algorithms with just a single move. But while these are still both popular methods for beginners 20 years later, it was a new method that combined the best of both worlds that determined the future of blindfold solving world records, which solves multiple pieces directly, called 3-style. And it'd be the pioneer of this approach, Chris Hardwick, who would use this to break multiple world records for solving the 4x4 and 5x5 blindfolded, setting the stage of what was to come. But as we go to the 6x6 and beyond, how do people memorize over 100 or even 200 pieces? Well, obviously memorizing numbers would be a nightmare, but we can assign a letter to each sticker of every corner and edge with 2 to spare, which makes memorization even easier. And Chris took inspiration from people in memory sports and started pairing the letters up, turning them into words and images. But still, how would this apply to solving a 6x6 or 7x7 with so many more pieces? Well, it turns out there's never more than 24 of any piece type, which means you can still put the exact same letters on each side as on the standard 3x3 Rubik's Cube, no matter how big the cube becomes. And instead of memorizing the images as is, we can place these images on a journey in familiar locations. And using a prototype of a 6x6 in 2007, Chris would become the first person to solve one blindfolded, which I don't have footage of him finishing, so here's him doing it in 2025, all these years later. And once the V-Cube 7 came out, another top blindfold solver, Mike Huey, would be the first to succeed with it on his second try in 2008. But because nothing beyond an 8x8 existed, there was nothing else for a while. Until later in 2010, when Yushin released an 11x11. Which would be a bit too big for now, but finally in 2012, the first 8x8, then the following year, the first 9x9 would be released, which Mike and an up-and-coming blindfold solver, Roman, would try to solve blindfolded. But while there are even more pieces to deal with, there are other problems that start to emerge. Firstly, when memorizing the cube, it can be hard to figure out which one is which, especially the center pieces. Then when you're turning the cube, you have to really make sure you're turning the correct layers, using your wrists and arms more. But the worst part is, if you're far off, you'll question your entire existence and why you wasted so much time for nothing. And if you're really close, you'll question your existence and why you wasted so much time for nothing. But there's something inside you that drives you through this pain, perhaps to prove to the world that anything is possible. And you just know that if you try hard enough, eventually there will come a time when you least expect it where everything just falls into place. And you set a new world record for solving the biggest Rubik's Cube blindfolded. And on Mike's 14th try, and for Roman it took around 19 tries, they both succeed for the first time. But while Shengshao would release a 10x10 later in 2013, which Roman would try, midway through his attempt, a piece pops out of the cube, but he finds it and fixes it while blindfolded. And after a grueling 4 hours, he winds up with this, and I couldn't find any more attempts from him. And besides, to make solving a 10x10 seem more doable, it'd help to have another kind of breakthrough, which we got, but in a totally different category. Because around the same time, Martin did one of the most legendary things in cubing history, and took Zane's world record of solving multiple cubes blindfolded from 23 out of 25 all the way up to a perfect 41 out of 41 cubes. But it wasn't just the sheer amount that was crazy, but the fact that there's a 1 hour time limit, and he finished with 6 minutes to spare. So surely he could be the one to solve a 10x10 blindfolded. Well, no, I don't think he was ever interested, and the only official competition event was solving one Rubik's Cube blindfolded, solving many Rubik's Cubes blindfolded, 4x4 blindfolded, and 5x5 blindfolded. And anything beyond that is just for people that, to say the least, really like doing hard things. But in the meantime, while people were playing catch up to Martin, Roman, who also decided to focus on dominating 5x5 blindfolded, setting multiple world records of his own, continued to shatter the limits of what people thought were possible over the next 5 years. And eventually, in 2018, with new and better cues from Yushin, Enoch Gray would break through, getting the first ever 10x10 attempt in just 10 tries. But even crazier is that after just 4 tries, he gets the world's first 11x11 blindfold success. And that's where the record still stands 7 years later. But that could change very soon, because in 2025, Graham Siggins, multiple world record holder in solving multiple cubes blindfolded, became the second person in the world to solve a 10x10 after 75 failed attempts, and later on his 29th attempt solves an 11x11 blindfolded too, more than halving Enoch's time. So next time you're trying to overcome something impossible, just remember that the literal inventor of the Rubik's Cube thought his puzzle was impossible to solve, until he figured it out a month later. And now, all these years later, here we are talking about a very real possibility of solving the 12x12 blindfolded. And who knows how far we'll go.
Are you kidding me?